Alison Austin shows us how opencast mining has impacted on her community, where families near the area where I grew up have had to live with opencasting every day. But no campaign stopped Force of Ran and no protest prevented this pit from coming within metres of homes in Merthyr Tydfil. The people who live there contend with the noise, the dust, how it impacts on their health and the scars on the surrounding landscape. This debate today may be retrospective in relation to the particular development in Merthyr, but lessons can be learnt for other similar developments, if there are ever any developments of the kind. Force of Ran is just one of several communities across Wales living cheek by jowl with opencasting. The Welsh Government finds itself caught between a rock and a hard place, in my opinion, with the interests of those communities on one hand and economic concern for the people who work there, often in areas where such work is in short supply. But what becomes more important? Job creation during this recession, or quality of life for those former industrial communities? Can we balance both, and can we find long-term economic benefits for the areas in which they operate? I believe that the way forward comes from this Assembly, from its power to legislate, by ending the loopholes that leave those on the edge of opencast mines so anxious as the pits creep even closer to their backyards. It is about setting out clear stipulations that allay those anxieties. But the rules that we have don't seem to be working for those communities, despite bold claims to the contrary. Gaynor Ball, who lives in Kenfig Hill in my region, and has fought against opencast mining for many years, most recently against the further extension of Park Slip site at Margam. She argues that opencasting impacts on biodiversity, rural landscape, health and well-being. She has won the current battle. An application to extend Park Slip was rejected last Friday, but she and others want a presumption against opencast pits in Wales. Susan Jordan has been fighting opencast mining at Ochr y Waun in Cwm Llynfell, again in my region. She believes that the site is standing in the way of inward investment, property development and tourism. She told me the East Pit opencast site workings are now 400 yards from our house and the site boundary is 50 yards. There have been numerous problems with workings on the site, no communications from the site operator, blasting that shakes the house, noise and dust. There are two applications for opencast developments in Farteg near Torfaen. The first would extract 350,000 tonnes and sit within 500 metres of settlements. Local resident Dr John Cox says the developers argue that reclaiming old tips is the same as regeneration, allowing them exceptional circumstances as outlined in the Mineral Technical Advice Note 2, the Coal MTAN on coal. The Coal MTAN announced by the Minister in January this year, which I welcome as part of the One Wales Agreement, pledged that it will introduce health impact assessments for coal applications, together with buffer zones and with an emphasis on working closely with local communities. It reaffirms the commitment to a 500-metre buffer zone. But how effective are these new policy initiatives? Do they work in practice? And do they live up to the expectations that they created? According to MTAN 2, a buffer zone should extend to 500 metres. They should minimise disturbances. But, for example, the local development plan of Merthyr Council recognises that opencasting has been allowed within 500 metres at Force of Ran, and I quote, due to the circumstances surrounding each site, and because, of course, it began in 2005 before the buffer zone was introduced by the Welsh Government. Opencasting is allowed within the buffer zone through exceptional circumstances, and there are many of them. Remediating land damaged by shallow coal workings, where there is significance for regeneration, employment and the local economy, and where extraction would take place ahead of permanent development. Campaigners argue that Force of Ran would not have required a buffer zone because it would have been covered by at least 4 of the MTAN's exclusions. So how can a buffer zone protect communities if exclusions will almost always override any safeguards? The 500-metre buffer zone is supposed to help the communities living within 500 metres of opencasting, and thus, according to campaigners, the exceptional circumstances that may be cited to justify opencasting must include a real measure of compensation for the people living within the zone and discomforted by opencasting. Economic factors appear to take precedent over environmental and health considerations in many areas. Who decides whether a proposal can bring regeneration? Is it the developers, the council, the citizens? Reclamation without genuine regeneration cannot, in my opinion, constitute an exceptional circumstance and justify open casting so close to people's homes. Where there are concerns with buffer zones, health impact assessments need to be implemented. We need to be sure that the HIAs are truly independent. Campaign groups say they should be reviewed and amended on a 3-year basis, while Friends of the Earth Cymru argue that all opencast applications should be accompanied by a HIA, rather than only those that may have significant effects on human health. Campaigners in Farteg say that while the Minister pledged in January to introduce HIAs for coal applications, and with an emphasis on working closely with local communities, this has not occurred in their particular area. There are further examples where legislation ends up in conflict within communities and between operators. Much of the anger that arises out of open casting comes when extensions are applied for. Many people near open cast mines resign themselves to living with them for perhaps 7 years, only to then discover that the companies want to continue operating them. If they don't, then they are hardly compelled to restoring finished sites. Companies such as Celtic Energy work from extensive British coal surveys on existing underground reserves. The NUM has estimated that as much as 250 million tonnes still lie in seams in the South Wales coalfield. We have a good idea about how much is down there. Yes, mining companies often only discover a seam is exhausted once they reach it, or they will encounter impassable or financially prohibitive obstacles. These businesses must deliver a return. No easy thing, given the volatility of coal prices, while their workers worry about work once a pit's announced lifetime comes to an end. For example, the demise of Park Slip could spell trouble for the wider industry, which employs over 1,000 workers directly and through contracting in South Wales. Margam coal is used as part of a fuel blend for Aberthaw Power Station, and the Opencast Coal Committee of Wales, which came to see me this week, warns that the absence of this vital ingredient could have dire economic consequences at other mines. But why can we not compel operators to reveal how long they are minded to work these sites? Should we not clear away these vagaries that impact so heavily on people's lives, with robust legislation that is made absolutely clear to all sides and interests what communities can expect? No nasty surprises for communities or for the workers. I believe the way to build such a robust framework of legislation is to introduce a presumption against open casting here in Wales and to look at alternatives for regeneration and economic development. In my opinion, operators have not proven the case to local communities, to councils or to the National Assembly that open cast mining is the way forward for Wales. There has to be benefits for, not detrimental to local communities, and they must have a say in the future of their communities, as this shapes the way for the future generations. Diolch yn fawr.